I still remember the first time I really noticed her. Of course, I'd met her before. She was my friend's mom, the kind of woman you greet politely when you come over, say, "Hello, auntie," and move on. But that evening was different. My friend had invited me over after class, and by the time we got to his place, the sun was dipping low, filling the house with that golden light that makes everything feel softer, quieter. She was standing in the kitchen when we walked in, tying her hair back in a loose knot. I don't know why, but for a second I just stopped at the doorway. There was something about her presence, the easy way she moved, the calm in her posture. She wasn't dressed up, not trying to impress anyone, just in a simple blouse and jeans. But she carried herself with a kind of grace that made me feel aware. Aware of her voice when she greeted me, low and steady. Aware of the faint smile on her lips that lingered just a moment too long before she turned back to the stove. "Tea?" she asked, already reaching for a cup. I nodded quickly, maybe too quickly, and stepped inside. When she placed the cup in my hands, her fingers brushed against mine. Warm. Steady. It was the smallest thing, but I felt it ripple through me. My friend had already run upstairs to grab something, leaving me there in the kitchen with her. I tried to act casual, leaning on the counter, sipping the tea. But I couldn't ignore the faint scent of her perfume drifting toward me, something light, floral, with a hint of spice that felt oddly intimate in the quiet space. "You've been keeping him out too late again," she teased gently, nodding toward where her son had disappeared. I laughed, a little nervous. "Maybe. But he doesn't complain." She gave me a knowing look, one eyebrow raised, as though she could see right through me. And for just a heartbeat, her eyes held mine, calm, dark, searching. It wasn't long, but it was long enough for me to feel something stir that I wasn't prepared to name. I told myself I was imagining it. She was older, wiser, and completely out of reach. But as I stood there, tea warming my hands, I couldn't shake the sense that she wasn't just being polite. There was a quiet awareness in the way she smiled, the way her gaze lingered just a second too long before she turned back to the sink. When my friend came back down, the spell broke. She stepped aside, giving us space, her voice returning to its usual calm. But even then, as we headed toward the living room, I glanced back once, and caught her watching me, just for a moment, before she looked away. And that's when I realized, something about her was going to stay with me. It's strange how the smallest moments can change everything. That evening, it happened by accident. My friend had left the living room for a few minutes, something about running upstairs to grab his charger. I stayed behind, half scrolling through my phone, half listening to the faint clatter of dishes coming from the kitchen. And then she appeared again. His mom. Carrying a small tray with snacks, moving with that same effortless grace I'd noticed earlier. "You boys must be starving," she said lightly, setting the tray down on the coffee table. I smiled, trying to sound casual. "Thank you. You didn't have to." Her lips curved into the softest smile. "Mothers always have to. It's part of the job." For some reason, I found myself laughing quietly. It wasn't just what she said, it was the warmth in the way she said it, a warmth that seemed to reach beyond simple politeness. As she handed me a plate, her fingers brushed against my wrist. Just a second, just skin against skin, but it made me more aware of her than I wanted to admit. I looked up instinctively, and our eyes met. She didn't pull back right away, and I couldn't either. It was one of those small moments that doesn't belong to anyone else, only to the two people standing in it. I cleared my throat, trying to focus on something else. "So, do you read much?" I nodded toward the book on the armchair beside her. Her face lit up, surprised. "More than I should, probably. It's how I escape." There was something in her tone, not rehearsed, not casual, but real. Vulnerable. Like she hadn't meant to let that slip. I leaned forward, curious. "Escape from what?" She hesitated. A tiny pause. Her hands adjusted the corner of the tray, though it didn't need adjusting. Finally, she shrugged softly. "From everything. Responsibilities. Expectations. Time, maybe." Her words lingered in the air, heavier than they should have been. I wanted to ask more, but before I could, she shifted the mood with a gentle laugh. "Listen to me, rambling. You must think I'm so boring." "Not at all," I said quickly, meaning it more than I expected. "I like listening to you." Her eyes flicked up to mine again, and for a heartbeat, neither of us looked away. There was a quietness in her gaze, a question maybe, or a warning. I couldn't tell. But I knew I didn't want the moment to end. When my friend came back into the room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. She straightened up, her expression smoothing into something neutral. I leaned back, pretending to be relaxed, though inside I felt the echo of that moment like a steady hum beneath my skin. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a conversation. Just an accidental closeness. But it felt like the beginning of something I wasn't supposed to want. The house was quiet that night. Too quiet. I'd been lying awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Sleep wouldn't come, so eventually, I gave up and decided to grab a glass of water. I moved carefully, not wanting to wake anyone, the wooden stairs creaking under my weight as I made my way down. When I stepped into the living room, I froze. She was there. His mom. She was curled up on the couch, a lamp glowing beside her, a book open in her lap. Her hair was loose this time, falling softly around her shoulders, and the quiet light made her look almost unreal, like she didn't belong to the ordinary world at all. "Oh," she said softly, looking up at me. "You couldn't sleep either?" I shook my head, suddenly more awake than I'd been all night. "No. Just restless, I guess." She smiled faintly and set her book aside. "It happens." Her voice was softer at this hour, slower, like it carried the weight of everything she didn't usually say. I hesitated, then sat on the far end of the couch. Not too close, but close enough to feel the warmth of her presence. For a while, we just sat there, the silence between us gentle, almost comfortable. Then she asked, "What keeps you restless?" I let out a breath, surprised at myself for answering honestly. "The future, I guess. Not knowing what I'm doing, or if I'm doing enough. Everyone else seems to have it figured out, and I'm still figuring myself out." She nodded slowly, her eyes on me, not judging, just listening. "You're young. You're not supposed to have it all figured out yet. Trust me. There was something in the way she said it, like she knew exactly what it meant to feel lost. And for the first time, I wondered how much of her life she'd kept hidden behind that calm, steady smile. Our conversation drifted, from small regrets to quiet dreams. She admitted she often read late at night because it was the only time she could truly feel like herself. I admitted that sometimes I felt invisible in my own life, like no one really noticed me. She looked at me then, really looked. And her gaze was so steady, so warm, I felt something stir in my chest. Before I could say anything else, she leaned in, her shoulder brushing mine. Her voice dropped to a whisper, so close I could feel the warmth of her breath against my ear. If anyone finds out, she paused, her words trembling just slightly, you'll be in big trouble. I froze, my heart hammering. She pulled back just enough for me to see her eyes, wide, conflicted, yet filled with something she wasn't saying aloud. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a warning. It was a confession. The next evening, everything felt different. Nothing had been said outright, yet the air between us had shifted since her whispered warning. I kept telling myself I had imagined it, that it was just the late hour and the quiet of the house making things feel more intense than they really were. But deep down, I knew. Something unspoken now lingered between us. My friend had dozed off early in his room, leaving the two of us in the living room again. She was curled up on the couch, this time with a blanket draped loosely over her legs, the glow of the lamp painting warm shadows across her face. She looked comfortable, but the moment she noticed me, she adjusted her posture, tucking her hair behind her ear as though she'd been caught off guard. "You're still awake?" she asked gently. I nodded, settling into the armchair across from her. "Couldn't sleep again." Her lips curved into a faint smile, but there was a nervousness beneath it. A pause stretched between us, filled only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Normally, silence would have felt awkward. But here, it was charged. It hummed softly, like the air just before a storm. At some point, I moved from the armchair to the other end of the couch. It wasn't a conscious decision, it just felt natural. She shifted slightly too, pulling the blanket so it covered both of us, though barely. Our knees almost touched, the thin layer of fabric brushing against my leg every time she adjusted. Neither of us spoke for a while. We didn't need to. The closeness was its own kind of language. Her hand rested against the couch cushion, and I found my gaze drawn to it, the delicate curve of her fingers, the slight movement as if she was fidgeting. I wondered if she was aware of how close my hand was to hers. Finally, she sighed, breaking the silence. "This is dangerous." Her words were quiet, almost swallowed by the night. I looked at her, meeting her eyes. "I know." We held each other's gaze for what felt like forever. In her eyes, I saw conflict, restraint, worry, but also something softer, something that mirrored what I felt inside. She looked away first, her fingers toying with the edge of her bracelet. The gesture seemed small, but I could feel the tension running through her. I wanted to reach for her hand. I wanted to close the gap. But I stayed still, caught between wanting more and respecting the unspoken boundary she had drawn. The silence stretched again, heavy with everything we weren't saying. The blanket shifted slightly, her arm brushing mine. The touch was nothing, accidental, fleeting, but it sent a rush of warmth through me that I tried to hide. We didn't move closer. We didn't speak another word. We just sat there, side by side, in the hush of the night, both pretending we weren't feeling the same pull. And yet, I knew, that quiet moment, with its unspoken electricity, bound us more than words ever could. The night I left, something happened that I'll never forget. It had been a long evening, laughter with my friend, casual conversation, the kind of ordinary moments that should have felt simple. But beneath it all, I could sense her presence in the background, like a quiet melody I couldn't tune out. Every time she walked past the living room, every time her voice drifted from the kitchen, I felt my awareness sharpen, as though a part of me was always waiting for her. By the time it grew late, I stood by the door, slipping on my jacket. My friend had already gone upstairs, too tired to see me out. It was just her and me in the entryway. She leaned lightly against the wall, arms folded, watching as I fumbled with my sleeves. "It's late," she said softly. "Drive safe." I nodded, my throat drier than it should have been. "I will." For a moment, we just stood there. The quiet stretched between us again, the kind that carried more weight than words. She stepped forward, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, warm, floral, with a touch of something that reminded me of spice. Her eyes searched mine, as if she were debating something, and then she reached out. Slowly. Deliberately. Her hand lifted to the collar of my jacket, smoothing it down, fingers brushing lightly against my neck. The touch was simple, almost motherly in gesture, but the way her hand lingered made it feel like something else entirely. My breath caught, and I wasn't sure if she noticed or if she was feeling the same charge that was racing through me. She didn't pull away immediately. Her fingers hovered for a second, the warmth of her hand seeping into my skin. And when her eyes lifted to mine, I saw it, the hesitation, the restraint, but also the quiet longing neither of us had dared to admit. I swallowed hard, my voice low. "Thank you, for everything." Her lips curved into a small, tender smile. "You don't have to thank me." But I wanted to. Not just for the tea, or the food, or the kindness. For the way she had listened. For the way she had made me feel seen in ways I didn't know I needed. She finally let her hand fall back to her side, though the space between us still pulsed with unspoken words. For a second, I thought she might step back, put the distance where it belonged. Instead, she stood there, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her body in the cool night air. The moment broke when she glanced away, her voice steady but softer than before. "Good night." I stepped outside, the door closing gently behind me. But the sensation of her fingers against my collar stayed with me, delicate, lingering, impossible to forget. And as I walked to my car, heart racing, I knew one thing for certain: whatever this was between us, it was no longer something I could ignore. A few days later, I found myself back at their house. I told myself it was just to hang out with my friend again, but a part of me knew better. The truth was, I wanted to see her. The afternoon passed in the usual blur: games, jokes, the kind of easy banter my friend and I always shared. But when he left suddenly to run an errand, I was alone again in that house that felt too quiet when it was just the two of us. She was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes. The light streaming through the window framed her in soft gold, and for a moment, I just stood in the doorway, watching. She noticed me after a second and smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes the way it usually did. "You're quiet today," she said gently, turning back to the sink. I walked in, leaning on the counter. "Just thinking, I guess." She didn't press, but something about her presence loosened the words in me. About everything. About how complicated life feels sometimes. She dried her hands with a towel, then turned to face me. Her expression was calm, but I could see the flicker of something deeper. "Complicated," she repeated softly, as though the word carried a private weight. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, with a quiet sigh, she leaned against the counter opposite me, her voice barely above a whisper. "This, whatever's happening between us, it can't. You know that, don't you?" The word stung, but I could hear the conflict in her tone. She wasn't pushing me away out of coldness, it was fear, caution, maybe even guilt. "I know," I said quietly. "But that doesn't stop me from feeling it." Her breath caught. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw her vulnerability fully exposed. "Do you think it's easy for me? You think I don't?" She stopped herself, biting her lip, shaking her head. "I'm not supposed to feel this way. Not about you." The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't move, afraid to break whatever fragile truth had just been spoken. My heart pounded, and I could feel every second stretching, waiting for me to say something. "I can't stop thinking about you," I admitted finally, the words low, almost trembling. Her eyes closed for a brief moment, as though she was gathering strength. When she opened them again, her hand shifted on the counter, inching closer to mine. Slowly, carefully, our fingers brushed, the lightest contact, but enough to send a jolt through me. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. Her hand settled against mine, warm, steady, trembling just slightly. For a few endless seconds, we stayed like that, our hands joined in a silence that said more than any confession ever could. Then, almost reluctantly, she let go, stepping back as though she had to put a wall between us again. "We can't," she whispered, her voice heavy with conflict. But even as she pulled away, I knew she was holding back something real. Something she wanted as much as I did. And in that fragile, stolen moment, I realized we had already crossed a line we couldn't uncross. The last evening I spent there is etched in my memory like it happened yesterday. It was late again. My friend had already gone upstairs, leaving the two of us by the door as I got ready to leave. The night outside was calm, the air cool with the faint sound of crickets carrying through the open window. Everything about it felt still, as if the world was holding its breath. She stood a few steps away, leaning lightly against the doorway, arms folded in a way that looked protective. Guarded. Yet her eyes told a different story. They lingered on me longer than they should have, soft and searching, as though she was memorizing me. "You should go," she said gently, almost like an instruction to herself as much as to me. "I know." My voice came out low, steady, though inside I was anything but calm. I reached for the handle of the door, but before I could open it, she stepped closer. Just one step, but it closed the distance enough for her presence to feel overwhelming. Her hand lifted, hesitated in the air, then found my arm. It was such a simple touch, her palm resting lightly against my sleeve, but the weight of it sent warmth flooding through me. She looked down at where her hand rested, as though debating whether she should pull it back. Instead, she let it linger. "You've made this harder than it should be," she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. I swallowed, my throat tight. "I never meant to." "I know," she said softly, meeting my eyes again. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world felt small, like it was just the two of us standing in that quiet doorway, with all the things we couldn't say pressing down between us. And then she did something that caught me completely off guard. She leaned in, slow, hesitant, almost as if giving me a chance to stop her. Her lips brushed my cheek, not rushed, not careless, but with a tenderness that held everything she hadn't said aloud. The kiss was soft, fleeting, yet it carried more weight than anything else could have. Her hand squeezed my arm lightly before she let go, her eyes shining with unspoken words. "We have to be careful," she whispered. I nodded, unable to find words. My heart raced, my skin tingled where her lips had touched, and my mind spun with the knowledge that nothing between us could ever be the same. I stepped outside, the cool night air rushing over me. Behind me, the door closed softly, leaving me alone with the echo of her kiss and the warmth of her hand still imprinted on my arm. I walked to my car in silence, but every step felt heavier, fuller, like I was carrying something precious and dangerous at the same time. Because in that quiet resolution, I knew the truth, we had both admitted it without saying it outright. Something real existed between us. Something neither of us could deny, no matter how carefully we tried to hide it.